Hello, everyone. Let's give a minute or two for other people to join in, and we will start in 2 minutes.
Caitlin will be here in 30 seconds. Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm Melissa Aronchik. I'm one of the founders and also the host today for this event. And I want to just start by saying you are in the right place. You are at the Rutgers Digital Ethnography Working Group event, Finding Research Funds for Qualitative and Ethnographic Projects. We have just hit record, so we will be recording this event and we will make it available on our YouTube page after the event. In the meantime, just to get started, I would love to hear where everybody is coming in from. If you want to just put in the chat, like your name and your, where you're coming to us from, what city or country. It's always kind of fun to see. I'm coming to you live from Brooklyn, New York, myself. Nice. Got some good local representation here from across New Jersey, but we also have some fun international representation. Yay, from Brazil, from Spain, from India. Nice. Great to see. Okay. So yeah, let's just I'll give it like 1 more minute or so, and just because I see some more and more people are coming in. We got 50 so far. We'll probably get a few more. Not surprisingly, we had a really great response, RSVP, to this event. This is one of those things that I think brings a lot of people together, lots of interest. So that's kind of fun. Yeah, exactly, Latoya. We're talking about money. So everybody wants to know more. This is good. All right. So, Youngrim, if it's all right with you, I'm going to do like just an intro about DEWG, and then I'll pass it to you to introduce the panelists. Is that all right? Okay.
Sounds good. Thank you, Melissa.
Sounds good. All right. So, hi, everyone. And my name is Melissa Aronchik. I'm a faculty member at Rutgers University in the School of Communication and Information. And I am one of the co-founders, along with Dr. Jeff Lane, of this digital ethnography working group, which we familiarly call DEWG. I want to start by just saying a few words about our group, and then I'm going to turn the floor over to Youngrim Kim to introduce our panelists and moderate the event. So we are currently based in the School of Communication and Information at Rutgers University in New Jersey. Our mission is to program events that appeal to a community of national and international scholars who are figuring out, along with us, how to do close-up research in a digital era. We seek to develop methods and approaches for the study of culture in both online and offline worlds, and using both online and offline tools. We also have writing groups to develop our craft in intimate online writing environments, and we have internal membership events to workshop writing in progress and just talk about recent developments in the field. So I mentioned Jeff Lane and myself as the co-founders of this group, but we also have a wonderful steering committee made up of faculty here at Rutgers. We have Dr. Caitlin Petrie, who's one of the panelists today. We have Dr. Youngrim Kim, who's going to host us today, and we have Yoni Rivera, who's also a panelist today. We also have the wonderful Ms. Bahar Badier as our event coordinator. And in a minute, I'll put her contact information in the chat, so you can reach out to her if you want to join our mailing list to learn about upcoming events. I want to also mention we are recording today's event and we will be posting it on our YouTube page. So I'll also give you a link to that YouTube page. And I invite you to not only review this event, but we have a fantastic archive of, I think, nearly all of our prior events. And a lot of them are really useful, lots of hands-on tips, lots of really fantastic speakers who've we've been privileged to have join us. So this is a really great group. We're very proud of it. And we're really happy with the kind of community that we've created. So, all right, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Youngrim. I know you guys are all here to hear the events of today. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Melissa. Excuse me. Thank you, Melissa, and thank you everybody for being here today on this exciting event on talking about money and finding research funds, especially catering to qualitative and ethnographic projects. So this event, let me first give you a brief overview of the event itself and how it was first conceived. It's organized to demystify the process of securing funds for qualitative and ethnographic projects, especially for early career scholars. And we figured that a lot of conversations surrounding finding research money, finding research grants and fellowships are most of the time centered around quantitative and social scientific oriented projects. And there were less resources that were available for qualitative and ethnography and digital ethnographic works. So we became interested in talking about what kinds of resources are available for these types of research, and what are some best practices for crafting proposals for these types of research. So we thought about what about bringing together these recent awardees of these different types of grants and fellowships, specifically from the National Endowment of the Humanities, the NEH, the National Institute of Health, NIH, and the Social Science Research Council, which also called SSRC, and really hear these awardees' experiences of preparing the applications. So without further ado, let me introduce our fantastic panelists for this event. So first of all, first panelist is Caitlin Petrie, who is our very own steering committee for the DEWG group. And she's an associate professor of journalism and media studies at Rutgers University. Her work examines the social processes, organizations, and actors behind the digital data sets and algorithms that are increasingly governing the contemporary world. So Petrie's book, All the News That's Fit to Click, which came out from Princeton University Press, offers an ethnographic look at how performance analytics are transforming the work of journalism. And her scholarship has been published in journals including Social Media and Society, the International Journal of Communication, the American Journal of Sociology, Social Forces, and Digital Journalism. And her current research on generative AI and organized labor in media industries is funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities. She won this great award this year. Petrie has been featured or quoted in popular publications such as the New York Times, The Guardian, The American Prospect, Wired, and The Atlantic. And she holds a PhD in sociology from NYU and was previously a postdoctoral fellow at the Information Society Project at Yale Law School. Our second panelist is Fernanda Rosa. She is an assistant professor of science and technology studies at Virginia Tech, a public university located on Tutelo and Monacan lands. Her current work focuses on internet governance and design from a decolonial perspective, social justice, and global South perspective. In her second and current book project, she proposes a new method defined as code ethnography. Based on decolonial feminist and science and technology studies, she applies code ethnography to shed light on the inequalities embedded on the internet infrastructure and protocols that shape how our data circulates online, including the data of indigenous people in Latin America. Fernanda is also the founder and facilitator of the Abya Laya Pluriversity, an initiative to ignite anti-colonial science and technology initiatives comprised of a network of universities in Abya Yala, the Americas, including indigenous universities. Fernanda's work has been supported by organizations such as the NEH with the Program on Dangers and Opportunities of Technology and the Social Science Research Council, where she is a recipient of the Just Tech Fellowship from 2023 to 2025. Her work is published in English, Portuguese, and Spanish. And our last panelist is Yoni Rivera. She is also our very own steering committee of the DEWG. She's an assistant professor in the Department of Communication at Rutgers University, School of Communication and Information. And originally from Puerto Rico, Rivera's scholarship focuses on reducing health inequities and improving the well-being of Latinx communities through health communication initiatives. Her work uses qualitatively driven mixed methods and community-based participatory research to study social media health misinformation, cancer control and prevention, and disaster relief. She specifically focuses on working with communities to develop culturally tailored cancer educational materials for Latina, Latinx communities, understanding how engagement with health misinformation on social media can impact health decisions, and outlining the role of social media in health communication and community mobilization. Rivera has a PhD in social and behavioral sciences from Johns Hopkins School of Public Health, and an MPH in behavioral sciences and health education from Emory University. And she will be sharing her experiences with getting internal and NIH grants, both on the predoctoral and postdoctoral levels. So how we are organizing the conversation today is there's going to be half of the conversation today is going to be structured discussion. So I have shared some questions with our panelists prior to this event. So it's going to be like a structured Q&A session in the first half, and then we're going to open the floor to the rest of the participants here today. And you can please feel free to write your questions on the chat. And in the second half, we're going to moderate those questions that you specifically have to our panelists. Okay, so here comes my first question to three of our panelists today. So I first wanted to kind of discuss a brief overview of your current project, specifically the project that you have won the research grant or fellowship. What was the project about? Can you provide us a brief overview of those projects and the grants and fellowship that you won for those projects? Caitlin, I think you're muted.
I was just going to ask if you want to call on someone or if we should just like.
Yeah, I don't know. It's Caitlin. You go first.
Okay. Thank you so much, Youngrim, first of all, for putting this event together. I'm really glad we're talking about this because it's something that I think I've had a lot of informal conversations with folks about who do ethnographic research, but maybe like not as many kind of getting all together and sharing things we've done that have worked and not worked, et cetera. So I think it's really valuable. So thanks for having me and making this happen. So yeah, my project was kind of I got interested in the question as I was watching what was called the Hollywood strikes unfold in the summer of 2023. So this was the Writers Guild of America, the Screenwriters Union, basically, and then SAG-AFTRA, which is the Screen Actors Union. As you all probably remember, they went on strike 2 summers ago, and generative AI was kind of a key sticking point in these strikes. So it was something that the unions were making a lot of demands around, but also talking about a lot. Like it was very sort of central in their talking points about why they were on strike and why they needed to sort of have like militant labor organizing against the studios, Hollywood studios. And so I was interested in this. And kind of interested in, I study generally like the relationship between, I would say, like labor and emerging technologies and creative work. And so this seemed like a really interesting case study to me. And I wanted to understand how cultural workers and the unions that represent them conceptualize generative AI, like how are they thinking about it, right? But then also not just leave it at, oh, they have these imaginaries of generative AI, but also how are these imaginaries or conceptualizations shaping the union's labor demands? Like, what are they wanting from the studios? And then also, and this was really crucial, how are their understandings of AI or the possibility for automation and creative work shaping how these cultural workers conceptualize their work and their labor and their status relative to other occupational groups. Because in the past, we have sometimes seen creative workers sort of set themselves apart and say that their work is like uniquely human or is special or requires a higher level of skill. But now that they're sort of facing technologically mediated automation, similar to many other groups of workers, how was that sort of changing the way that they spoke about the nature of creative work and whether it's similar or different from what other workers and other occupations are doing? And so that was sort of the main question. And you asked about the funding, how the grant came about.
Just one sentence on like what was the grant or fellowship that you received for this project?
Great. Yeah. So the grant was the National Endowment for the Humanities, which is a federal agency that funds research in the humanities and humanistic social sciences, had a kind of grant program. And the theme of it was the dangers and opportunities of technology. So this is like a very, very broad theme. The projects really ran the gamut. And so with a collaborator, Julia Ticona, who's a faculty member at the University of Pennsylvania, we decided to write up a proposal based on these questions and apply for this federal grant on the dangers and opportunities of technology. And it was a 2-year grant.
Thank you, Caitlin. I think we're going in the order of the introduction of the panelists. So what can Fernanda go next then?
Yeah, for sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Fernanda Rosa. Oye, hola. I see many people in the room who speaks also my native language and also the language that I speak the most when I'm doing field work, which is Spanish. So thank you very much to Youngrim to inviting me for this panel. I feel at home in this group. I was telling Melissa how important it is for us ethnographers to have spaces where we can share all the pain and the happiness of being ethnographers. And I think money is one of the pains because we are always so excited about the work we do and the communities we work with. But then it comes the moment of traveling, of spending time abroad or somewhere else. And we need resources to do that. It's very good that we learned this much before I learned myself, because sometimes you may design a project that is just not possible to make possible because you need to also account for resources. In my case, I study some global topic, which is internet infrastructure. And because internet infrastructure is everywhere, I could study it from any point in the world. And for me to select where I should study, and I study the nodes that bring networks together and defines where our data go when we send an email, when we look for some information. I am always concerned with the materiality of our data because we send a message and we may not know that this message is crossing borders, national borders, and going somewhere and crossing a surveillance state. And we don't even know what may be happening with that data once we send. We are always concerned with where our data arrives. So if I send a message to my mom, I just want her to receive the message. But I am also, as a researcher, concerned through where this data goes until arriving into its destination. And to study that, I could, again, study from any part of the globe. As I am a decolonial scholar, something that comes from the theory is always treating your fieldwork symmetrically and look for inequalities. So we are always looking for inequalities. And for that, I was comparing them, and I still compare global South infrastructure and global North infrastructure. And then I do research in Latin America, specifically Brazil and Mexico, and Europe, mainly in Germany, just because these are countries where the nodes are bigger, the internet nodes are bigger. And for me to do research in these countries, I submitted the project to some funds, and I ended up getting the 2 of them that I applied for in the same year. One is NEH that Caitlin just described, the DOT, Dangers and Opportunity of Technology, but she applied probably in partnerships, so she probably had a different amount than I did. If you apply by yourself, you get $75,000. That's what I got for my project. And the other application I did was for the Just Tech Fellowship. And this one is very different from any other kind of fellowship you can imagine. And they award you $200,000. And then I can explain better how you can spend this money because it's very different. Thank you very much again.
Hi, everyone. It's great to see so many people here. I think that this is a really important topic, as both Caitlin and Fernanda were mentioning. I'm going to talk about the area of my work that has received funding, both pre-doctoral and after, like now as faculty, because they're the same thread of work, and I want to be able to provide different insights to especially those of you who are at the pre-doctoral stage that might have questions. So broadly, as Youngrim mentioned earlier, my scholarship really looks at the impact of digital media and social media in particular, and how Latinos engage with and act upon and make sense of health information on these different platforms in both English and Spanish. During my doctoral studies, I was very interested in understanding how Latinos that were on Facebook in particular, which for those of you who are Latinos, you know that that's definitely a platform that like 8 years ago was a lot more prevalent in its utilization, and it still is. And really understanding how, from a cancer information perspective, Latinos were engaging with content that was showing up on their timelines, right? So how they are navigating the landscape that they are exposed to, given the networks that they have, versus more of this quantitative kind of look at just, you know, quantifying engagement as a like, a comment, a share, maybe even a view of a video, but not really having any of the context behind it. So as you can imagine, this is coming more from a health perspective, which is very much medicalized, very much a lot of emphasis is played on epidemiology and quantitative measures. So I needed to do a lot of justification in the funding mechanisms that I was working in to get a little bit of buy-in and understanding of why these particular processes were important to explore from more of a mixed methods approach, which I can, you know, if we can talk about that later. For that stage of my work, applied to multiple sets of funding. Internally, I'm not really going to talk about the internal funds, but I applied for NERSA, which is also called a F31. It's a pre-doctoral training, individual training award that you can apply to through the National Institutes of Health. And this one in particular, I applied to through the National Cancer Institute Center for Reducing Cancer Health Disparities. So there are multiple pots of money at NIH, and this one was targeting diverse pre-doctoral candidates in the space of cancer inequities. That funded me and my training, but I still needed money for my research. So I applied to another pocket of money through NIH as well to fund my research agenda. Once I arrived at Rutgers, not Hopkins, once I arrived at Rutgers, I wanted to continue this line of work and specifically exploring how Latinos and health educators in particular are navigating health information and misinformation on not just Facebook, but also WhatsApp, which is a very different and very much used platform in these spaces. So for that, I received funding within Rutgers directly from the Cancer Institute of New Jersey. But again, this is money that's funneled from NIH. So I applied for funding for this work. And I also applied for a loan repayment award, which pays off my student debt. So it's an award that is because of the research, and it is geared towards facilitating researchers' professional development by removing that burden of their student debt as it relates to different priority areas at NIH. So that's a little bit of the work that I've been doing and we're going to talk about.
Thank you, all of you. And I think Fernanda and Yuni are kind of, really nicely leading us to the second question that I was about to ask about the specific funding mechanism of the grants and fellowship that you have been awarded, because sometimes it's really confusing to understand what's the difference between fellowship and grant, like what different kinds of support does these different types of grants and fellowships offer to you. So can you briefly explain the funding mechanism of the grant or fellowship that you have received, and why did you target one type or the other? Fernanda, since you are the one who received both NEH and SSRC, why don't you go first?
Yeah. I'd like to have a beautiful answer for this question, but the fact is, when you are in need of resources, it's very hard for you to consider all the aspects of these funds. You usually go for, okay, how does my project match this specific resource? And so that was how I got to look at these funds that I mentioned. The dangers and opportunities of technology sounded for me exactly what I was seeing in my fieldwork, because I work with indigenous peoples in Mexico. And as I've been following how they build their own internet infrastructure for 8 years, I see how the differences that have happened throughout these years. And basically, it's some different actors coming to that space. They thought this was not a space for them to make money, but these new actors are arriving there and are just applying the mechanism of extractivism through internet infrastructure. So when I heard of the dangers and opportunities of technology, it was for me a match. And I didn't have difficulty in framing the project for that. And I think we are going to discuss better how to write for this, but I think this is a very important, like how your project matches that fund. And of course, sometimes you may expand one part of the project for that purpose. Although you do much more, you may just focus in one thing for that purpose. The Just Tech Fellowship was very different, and I think it still is, because it is not there to fund your research, but it is there to fund your whole person. And just to be clear here, I am talking from a personal capacity as a fellow, and I think if you need more information about them, about the fellowships and the grants, we should definitely go for the webpage. And if you have questions, I can definitely respond from a fellow perspective. But I would like to stress that fact that Just Tech is funding the whole person. And this makes a lot of difference because it's not about the research you are doing, but what are the needs that you have as a researcher too. So you can spend this money in all sorts of expenses differently from NEH, which is a more national and governmental kind of grant. So this is for me the main difference between this specific fellowship and a grant a national grant model.
Yeah, just adding to what Fernanda was saying, in my scenario, like I briefly mentioned, there are awards or fellowships, like Melissa was typing in the chat, that really have to do with the researcher, like either buying out your time or covering as a student. For example, the F-31 that I received, it gave me a stipend, and it also paid for certain things at the university, including health insurance, etc. So it was to free me up so I had time to do my research, but it did not pay anything about the research, which is why I had to apply to other pots of money. One was a $10,000 grant that I was mentioning, was also from NIH, that was the same research, but there I needed to allocate and prepare a budget. And for the actual research allocations, which I know we'll talk more about in a little bit. Similarly, transitioning to the postdoc, right? Like the faculty level, I applied for the loan repayment award, full on research plan, but it also included my training and mentoring plan, because what that award was for is to pay my debt. And they want to make sure that I'm doing research that aligns with the priorities of the National Institutes of Health and the National Cancer Institute, but they are not funding me. Actually, I had to demonstrate that I had funding to do the research in other ways, whether it's through, right, like your startup funds, or in my case, I was able to secure funding by submitting the same project to another internal grant mechanism through the center, the Cancer Institute of New Jersey. So that main difference between a grant and an award or fellowship is what the money is going towards. But in both scenarios, you're selling yourself and your research as aligning to the priorities, like Fernanda was saying. It needs to respond to their calls. I think that that's going to be very important.
Caitlin, do you have anything to add on this, or?
I don't really have anything to add, except just to say that the way that I found my way to the NEH Dangers and Opportunities of Technology grant was that I got an email from the program officer who was running it, asking me to review proposals for this grant. And then at the end of, and I had never heard of it. And at the end of the email, she said, oh, and if you're applying to it yourself, let me know, because you can't review in that case, because it's a conflict of interest. And so I had not heard about the grant before that, but I thought like, oh, well, I am going to apply. And so I think like, you know, sometimes you, like, I think as Joni was saying, like you find a call that just really fits neatly with what you do. And it makes the writing so much easier because you're not kind of bending yourself in knots to have, you know, a positioning that you otherwise wouldn't have.
And can I add something really quick, Youngrim, to piggyback off of what Caitlin was just saying? A research proposal and writing a research proposal is about the science. A grant or an award or a fellowship, you're writing about the science. The science is absolutely super important. And it's about selling your idea so you can get money for either you or your project. So the pitch in different areas is going to be a little bit different, and you really need to make sure that you're aligning what you're doing or what you're proposing you're going to do to the ultimate goals of the entity that you're submitting this application for.
I think Caitlin and Yoni too were really talking about important parts of the application process, which is going to be my next question, like about the details of preparing an application and to really where to start off. Like, how do people find available resources? How do people find out these calls? Like Caitlin, you mentioned that it was an email asking for you to review, but I know that different people have different strategies on managing these different types of calls and resources. So my next question had to do with like, how did you stay organized throughout the process? Like, do you have any strategies or tips for identifying grants and fellowships that's out there? Like, I don't know, like is a Twitter the right kind of channel for spreading the words around these fellowships? Like where do you find these resources? And how do you manage these deadlines around, gathering the required materials, finding important resources like samples and templates? So I just wanted to talk about the nitty-gritty of, managing deadlines, finding the calls, and finding other resources that helps you to write the application.
I can start, and I'm gonna preface this by saying that I'm coming from the perspective of health comm and more of this health clinical type of funding mechanisms. Now, one thing that I think is just super important is networking. And that is even just like talking to your advisors, to faculty members, to get a sense of different opportunities. I have several students here that work with me, and they know that I'm always sending any opportunities that I see that they're eligible for to them so that they're aware of their options. For me, in addition to that, because I've spent more than a decade in the National Institutes of Health pipeline, I am very familiar with different funding mechanisms that exist there. As young faculty or early career scholars, as pre-doctoral students, when you go to conferences, always look and see if there are any panels or any particular sessions that are going to be talking about funding mechanisms. For example, last year at the National Communication Association, there was a panel through HealthCom that had members from the National Institutes of Health and the National Cancer Institute talking about funding mechanisms. So those are places. And Youngrim, you also mentioned or asked about like Twitter, X. That is actually a place where I get a lot of the calls from, for example, the loan repayment program, because they do advertise these things there. So it's really being very aware of all of these listservs, email blasts, and when you find mechanisms that are of interest to you, but maybe you're not eligible yet, save them. Keep an eye on it, like put that on your calendar so that you know when a funding cycle opens. So you are like right on top of it. As soon as that call comes out, you can prepare, because to get a good whatever it is that you're submitting written up in a way that it is going to be funded, and maybe not the first time, you need a solid 2 months to be able to make sure, because this is not just about writing your research proposal. There are so many other components to any of these applications. Your training plan, if it's a fellowship or an award, where you have to identify mentors. You're going to have to get support letters in some scenarios, recommendation letters in other scenarios. You need to write out the budget and the budget justification. That has to align with your research plan. You have to identify in some of these spaces who your team is. And if you don't have people hired for those positions or whatnot, like you need to at least outline how much they're going to cost, what skills they need to have, and any other resources that your institution has, right? So it's not just about the research. And once you have these different things, I have a little list here of what I do to organize myself is make sure I get an example of a successful application. We are very, well, in my experience, people in my network have always been very open to sharing materials because that's how we help each other make sure that we are lining everything out in a way that's clear. Understand the reviewer criteria. So you need to go through everything and make sure that you outline what it is that they're going to be evaluating you on. And then I create timelines, checklists, and I copy and paste chunks of the instructions into the document that I'm going to be writing. So I'm sure that everything in that section is addressed. So those are some of my tips.
Can I just jump in? I have a couple of things to add. I was nodding vigorously because I agree with so much of this stuff. First of all, I think the role of Twitter / now X in spreading this stuff, I mean, it's a lot worse than it once was. I think listservs are hugely helpful, as Joni was saying. Like, so, you know, I'm on the listserv for the Center for Information Technology and Public Life at UNC, and they constantly are sharing calls and resources and stuff like that. So if there's research centers, you know, at other universities, groups like DEWG, like things like this, get on a lot of mailing lists because that's a good source. Another place I look for opportunities, funding opportunities, is if there's a scholar that I really love, or they're doing research that feels in the vein of my research, I read the acknowledgements when they publish an article or a book, because scholars will write who funded them in the acknowledgement section. And so that is a way that I have found out about certain funding opportunities or fellowships or things like that that I might not otherwise have known about. So I think that's a good place to look that sometimes we might not think about. And then I think just one of the things in terms of staying organized that I found, because this was the first federal grant like process I've been through that I found really challenging, I think, is specifically as an ethnographer. First of all, like I've often worked alone. So the idea that I had to bring in like the budget people at Rutgers and I had to bring them in really early, and it felt like it got really serious really fast. Like they were like, what's your work plan? And what's the justification? And how much is this going to cost? And I was like, I'm just an ethnographer. I got to get in there, you know, like, I don't know. It's just like not the way that we always approach research design. It requires a kind of like road mapping that felt a little uncomfortable for me sometimes. I was lucky to be with a collaborator who had done it before. But I think that, you know, it does, I think like maybe as ethnographers, we might, as Joni suggested, like put so much work into writing like the perfect project description, like narrative, like here's the meat of the question that I want to get at and like my beautiful field site and all these things. But a lot of our time writing this grant was also taken up by like, what's our timeline? What's our work plan? Like what is the line items of each of these things? And then also having to say like, why are we the right PIs to do this project? Because I think that's something that it seemed like was very emphasized, was like, show us the funding agency and these reviewers that like, not only do you have a good idea, but you are the right people to execute this idea so that they don't give you money and then it kind of goes nowhere. So that's just a couple of things I would add.
Fernanda, do you want to add anything to this?
Youngrim, can I share a quick slide?
Sure.
Because again, some of these awards aren't as labor intensive. Some of them, yes, you need to outline everything. You need to sell yourself. You need to explain why you and not someone else. But they maybe have 2-3 sections. Others have a lot more. For example, my F31 application was 85 pages long. So I can't write that in one sitting, right? For me, when I do this, I make sure that I outline all of the requirements. That is the first thing that I do, is I have like an outline that copies and pastes all of the instructions and all of the details. And then from there, I literally cut and paste the different criteria and I write sections based off of that. Otherwise, it becomes incredibly overwhelming when you need to tackle so many things.
I cannot highlight more on the importance. I think both of Joni and Caitlin mentioned about this, about reaching out to past awardees for their sample for their application. Like most of the times, awardees are more than happy to share these samples with them, and these help me. And Caitlin shared her ADH application with me. Like these are super helpful and would give you a greater sense of what is expected from the application. So I cannot more emphasize that. And I want to move on to the actual, practice of writing the proposal, like writing, especially for qualitative and ethnographic projects. Like, what are some of the strategies do you think works effectively on pitching a qualitative or ethnographic project? Or in general sense, do you have any tips for crafting a strong proposal for these kinds of work? I don't know, does anybody wants to go first on this one? I feel bad calling people out, so.
Are you
Yeah,
asking
Fernanda, go
about
ahead.
the
You go
pitching?
first.
Oh, are you asking about the pitching, how to pitch?
Yes,
Yes, I
that's
was
correct.
writing something else on the chat, but I'll then say it's related to that we can use things that we have written already to create this proposal that you are submitting to these grants and fellowships. So if you are writing a paper that is describing your research, if you already have a proposal, a research proposal that you have written, make sure you reread it and you bring that to this document. The difference, I think, is that you need to have in mind what Yoni already said, what they are really asking. And sometimes what you just need to do is repeat some words that are in their call. So if they are asking for like research objectives or general research objectives in their call, bring that word to your writing. The general research objectives is, and this may sound odd, but it is not, because when you are reviewing, and if you have had this role already, this is what people are looking for. If you are filling out all the fields that you should. So don't be bad for copy and paste the names that they are asking you and the titles, subtitles for the sections that they are asking you for. And with that in mind, I think you can create a pitch with that, what you have written already, also using their words for making them know that this is what you are saying. The more you make the reviewer life easier, the better for you too, because they read swiftly your application. And that also helps them to have a sense, oh, yeah, I understand what they are saying. The other important thing about pitch is that we kind of know, but it's always important to mention that some of the things that seem very clear to us may not be to reviewers of this very expanded grant. So one example is I applied to Just Tech 2 times to get it. The first time, they informed that it was more than 600 applications, and they shortlisted for about 30. And then I was in the short list, according to them, which made me receive the reviews I received from the board. And what I got from that reviews is that they couldn't kind of grasp what I was saying I was going to do. So once I understood that it wasn't that clear, I had to be much more specific than I was being. That was what I used to apply the second time. So the second time, I couldn't be more specific. Like there was no way I could be more detailed. So I detailed much more than my first time. So details, I think, for these proposals are also key. It's not only about the idea, the big idea, but it's about what exactly we're going to do. Because they all know we kind of have good ideas, but what is that you are really going to do, and how you are really going to do that? Do you have the collaborations that you need to do that? And I'll tell you this because some of us who are ethnographers, we have a huge network, but we usually don't talk about that in the way that we write, because it's not about that. It's not about networking, it's about collaborators, about people that we work together. But in the grants, it's important for them to see that you already have roots in where you are going to do research. So that's also something I would mention. And that is true for both, for NEH and for Just Tech.
I can just chime in. I love all that advice. I wholeheartedly second it. I think that, like, again, this kind of writing, being used to writing in an ethnographic way, and then transitioning, I think it's absolutely right. Like, the specificity that's required is much more than maybe we're used to. And also the kind of like, there's less, I don't know if the right word is like poetry or romance, but like there's a grant application is very like all no nonsense. Like, it's all business. It's like, here's the question that needs to be answered. Here's why ethnography is the way that it should be answered. And here's why I am the ethnographer who's going to come in and do the thing that needs to be done. And then once I do it, here's the exact amount of like publications I'm going to go for, the conferences I'm going to present at, the way that I'm going to share back what I found with my participants, if that's appropriate, given the question, right? So it felt a little sometimes like, I don't want to say joyless, but it's just very all business. And I think that in terms of pitching an ethnographic project, like, was just something that I had to get used to in terms of the style of writing that seemed to be expected. And yeah. So it was a bit of an adjustment.
So several things to add on to the advice that both Caitlin and Fernanda have already given. One thing that I want to reiterate from what Fernanda said is, you need to remember that people who are reviewing your proposal are researchers, faculty members from different disciplines, from different lines of work, from different methodological approaches that are possibly evaluating this in the middle of the semester. So you need to make their life simple. You need to make sure that you are writing clearly. Do not fear, like, repeat things over and over again. This is something that I do that I think it's a trend in more of this health space than in others. But when I have a very important sentence, I bold it or I underline it. Like, if anything, I want you to take away this particular point. This is like general writing, not specific to qualitative or ethnographic work. Anticipate questions, because again, especially if you're in a space like health, a lot of people who are going to be evaluating your work are most likely going to be epidemiologists, clinicians, quantitative scholars. And I have had to justify things that for me is like, I ask, like, why aren't you comparing? Because that's not what we do. Like, that's not what I'm trying, my objective with a qualitative, in-depth look at this particular group of people. But it's my job to explain that to them in a abbreviated way that's very clear. So you need to remember that not everyone understands the lingo. You need to define concepts, and then you have to keep everything consistent and clear. And I had something else over here. include white space. Sometimes we want to like fill every single, like make sure that there's a little bit of white space. Sometimes a table or a graph are going to really clarify things for the reader, because that's a roadmap for them. And what else do I have here? Don't forget about the budget. When you're writing, you need to make sure that whatever you're saying you're going to do in your research is reflected in the money, and that you're allocating realistically how much things are going to cost. So this requires you to do a little bit of research and planning ahead of time to make sure that all of that is lined up. And then sell yourself. Like Fernanda was saying, many times when you're asking for funds, they're funding that this is great sound science, that you're able to do it. So you have your letters of support from your community partners, you have evidence of publishing with your co-PIs, right? That there's an establishment of something that they can that you're showing that this is feasible. But then also you're selling yourself and your long-term research agenda. They want to know that this is, and many times, that this isn't a one-off thing. This is part of something more, especially if you're applying for awards and training grants, where what they want to see is that they're investing in you as a scholar. And they want to know that there's going to be a return on that investment later.
These are all awesome points. Thank you. Thank you, all of you. What I'm hearing across the board here is the feasibility of like how this project is going to be practiced and hold up to its promise. Like, is the goals achievable, deliverable? Like, what are you going to do in like year one, even like in semester breakdowns? So like, what are you going to do in this semester, next semester, and when are you going to bring the outcome? That feasibility is a really important part in the application process. Another thing that I'm hearing across the board is writing for non-experts. Like, don't assume that these are the expert scholars in your field. Do not put in jargons, and you need to really friendly walk through your ideas and your action items throughout the proposal. That's the two things that I'm hearing across the board. And also selling yourself, like selling that you as a researcher is more than able to finish this project in the timeline that you promised. So before I open open the floor to the rest of the groups here, my last question had to do with some kind of general experience with applying for grants and fellowships. So sometimes I know that there are a lot of graduate students in the room, there are early scholars, faculty members even. So I wanted to ask, is writing for grants or fellowship always a good idea? Or if not, like, when is the good time to do so? Like, how do you determine if you should apply for a grant or fellowship? And is it always beneficial to apply, or are there situations when it may not be the best choice? Caitlin, can you go first?
Yeah, I love that question because it is so time consuming. I mean, it's not, a federal grant was like on another level, but even some that are not federal grants can also be quite time consuming. And so I think that my answer would be no, it's not always worth it. I think the times where it would be worth it is, I would ask myself like two questions. Like, one, does this project that I have fit well with the call? Again, like, do not put yourself in a pretzel, because that's just not a good use of your time. But then also, like, do I need this money to, right? Like, I think that, like, in the case of a grant, a fellowship is like, we always all would love to have some money, so that's great. But for a grant, it's like, for example, when I was writing my book that was based on my dissertation, I didn't apply for grants because I had sort of mostly done the empirical research and I didn't need research funding at that moment. What I needed was like kind of to be able to head down and write the book. And so writing a grant at that time would have taken me away in terms of the way I spend my time from just like buckling down with that scary Word document and writing the book. For this project that we applied for the NEH grant for, it felt like we want to do this big ambitious project and we actually need the money to do it. Like we won't be able to do it. And it fit with the call. So I think, I think that it's hard because of course, like you can't get a grant if you don't go for it. And so it always feels like may as well go for everything and then something will come through. And I think there's truth to that. But I also think like being selective, especially if what you really need to be doing is like head down dissertation or head down book. Sometimes like we like to chase the new thing, or I do, I'll speak for myself because it's sometimes easier than like having to actually deal with the Word document that is my book or whatever it is. So yeah.
Yeah, I agree. If I can add to Caitlin too. I think the moment when you are and the needs you have also define what you should prioritize at that moment. I think it's also a huge decision if you're going to apply once more to something you gotta know first. And I'm here to say go for it. Because sometimes you just feel it's about you, and then you feel like, yeah, I'm not going to be funded by this for any reason. But I would say if you understood what happened in the first application, and that may be that you can even ask to the agents if you can have access to the reviews. This was allowed at NEH too. I don't know if it is only allowed for the ones who are granted, but you may ask. There is no problem in asking, and then review and redo that. I think this is the most important to evaluate your priorities and also always count on others to read what you are doing as well, because sometimes our evaluation may be not not as it could be. So it's good to always count on others to help us figure it out too. Ask for advice of your advisor because they are probably reviewers. So they will always help, or your colleagues and peers who usually are reviewers too. You can ask for help on that. And someone also mentioned here, I think it was Latoya, your work, your university may have also offices of sponsored research that they can also read what you are doing and then help you decide. Yeah, I go for it.
Okay. I'm sorry, my Zoom froze, so I had to log out and log back in. What was the question?
The question was, is it always a good idea to?
It is not always a good idea. Thank you for reminding me that, Youngrim. Absolutely not. And this is coming from someone who I do apply to external funding more so than some of my colleagues in the School of Communication and Public Health. It is a good idea, because if you are moving towards an environment where you are in a soft money environment, right, where grant funding is instrumental to fund your pay, then you are in a position where you need to consider, am I going to be in that space? And if so, I need to demonstrate, the sooner the better, that I am capable of receiving funding for the institution and for the research that I'm doing. But if you're not under that predicament, I think that it's something that you need to consider based on what your ultimate goals are. If you want to be a researcher at an academic, and you're in a line of work where the kind of research you want to do or the communities that you want to serve, you need funding for beyond what your institution is able to give you, then yes, you need to be very strategic about what you are applying for, but applying for funding is going to be useful. If you are a predoctoral student and you do not need funding to get your dissertation done, and you don't have manuscripts yet, or you're still kind of in that process of developing your CV, focus on that. Don't focus on getting a grant or an award unless you absolutely need the funding for it. So those are things that I think that you need to be in conversation with an advisor about to make sure that you're making the right decision for you at that particular time. But like Caitlin said, writing a grant is time you're not writing something else. And then you might get disillusioned when you don't get it the first time around, which happens a lot, right? So you need to also plan for that. You can't just plan for, I'm going to do this research only if I have this money, because you might not get the money the first time around, and that's going to delay your timeline, et cetera. So those are all things that you need to consider.
Youngrim, there's quite a few questions in the chat. Do you mind if I kind of raise those for the panel?
Sure, of course. Thank you,
Great.
Melissa.
So yeah, there's one from Larissa, and Larissa, I don't know if you want to just unmute yourself and ask directly, or if you want me to read what you have here.
Sure. Hang on. I'll even have a camera so you can see me.
Very good.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for this. This is really great. I do ethnography of various kinds, and mostly have not ever applied for funding and done it on my own, or just a few internal things. And I'm starting to feel like I would like to do something bigger. And yeah, so this is really helpful. My main question, I think the one I'm most interested in, is this: can you talk about having anti-colonial goals for your work and framing it in a way that doesn't scare off or alienate entities that you might want funding from? Because I think there must be a way to do it, but I'm always wondering about that. I think that's part of why I haven't applied for some of these things. So yeah, any thoughts on how you frame your work in that context would be great.
I'm happy to take a first stab at this. So I know that I wouldn't be surprised if everyone in this room does work that at the end of the day is towards goals that serve social justice, right? And obviously, as I think Larissa, you had also asked, like, what do we do now in this current state of affairs? You need to be very strategic about the words that you use in the funding applications that you're submitting, and you need to understand the position of the agency and the constraints with which they might be operating at specific points in time. And I'll give you an example. Right now, the advice from program officers and employees at the National Cancer Institute to researchers who are going to be applying for grants is, do not say health misinformation. Don't use that word. There's a chance that you won't be able to get through the actual high level processes with political and policy level, congressional level things that are happening. So I have to heed to that if I want to get the funding. And I will use other words like, incorrect information or evidence-based content or just other language. So when you're looking particularly at organizations that are either at the federal level or have certain, again, we're in a climate, who knows what's going to happen in the next few years. We need to be very strategic and this is my opinion, like the money is going to go to my communities through the work that I do. And if I need to soften my language to make sure that I'm able to get the funds so that I can serve these communities adequately, I'm going to soften my language. And that means that I need to make sure that I'm aware of where the organization stands. And talking to a program officer or other people who have an inside scoop in those entities is going to be really helpful.
Yeah, thank you so much for this question. I was writing down it here. I think the first thing your reviewers will want to know is what it is anti-colonial goals for you. And that comes to that space where when we are in our own communities, it's so easy to use certain terms, and everyone in our community understand why we are fighting against that. But when we are just applying to these things, we may be evaluated by white male researchers. And in this case, what you can do is just explain what you say, what you mean by the terms you are saying. And the other thing I think is to apply to that spaces where you know they are wanting what you are doing. So I would say just tech, for example, is a space where I don't feel I am a researcher machine. I feel that when we have our meetings, they are asking, how am I doing? Any burnout? And I don't hear that from agencies that are like very big at national instances. So we need also to care about that and to understand that there are places that want what we are doing. And these are places where we should be applying, even if it seems too much or too difficult. Like we are the first ones need to believe in what we are doing. Including getting internal funds is not a small thing. So the way we phrase that is also important. Like you got that, so congratulations for getting that. There is always a competition in that space too. Another thing about anti-colonial approaches I would mention is just that there are certain funds that do not allow us to transfer money to the communities as we wanted to. So, for example, it is because of the colonial standards that Western academia has. It seems that you may always need to frame as someone did some service to me, so I'm paying this person because they did something to me. And sometimes that's not the relationship that is established with the community. What you want is that they continue doing what they are doing. So you don't want them to do anything for you. Actually, you are grateful for them to be opening their communities for you to be there. So this kind of anti-colonial approach that you may also have, that's when you need to figure it out how you create the language to make sure you have that amount to do that. And when you are asking for reimbursement or for asking someone to pay that person, you may need to be writing that way. And that's how you need to figure it out. Like, what is the relationship here? It's not that you are lying or anything, but they understand the Western way of thinking, understand they are serving you, they are doing some service to you. You do not understand that way. And sometimes you need to write that way because that's the language that they require. That's what I'm trying to explain here. I hope I was clear about it, and that we can go in this direction. That, as Yoni said, that we really go in that direction because we know the goals that we have.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Do you want me to ask another question, Youngrim, or do you want to follow up?
No, I was looking at the chat. I mean, thank you first of all for these important questions, especially considering the current political climate. I know there are other students and faculty who are also working in the context of maybe like when proposing. Like another question, my work is basically mostly predominantly located in South Korea, and for scholars who are doing global research, there is also a question of how much do we need to cater our research that benefits the US or sends or contributes to the US, especially when applying for these federal grants. So how much do I need to show the relevance to relevance of our research to US audience. That's something I know a lot of applicants doing global research is thinking about. So I don't know, maybe this question is more to Fernanda and maybe not others, but I was wondering what your thoughts on this question was too.
Yeah, such a great question. I don't talk in terms of the US necessarily. I do talk about internet infrastructure as the main issue that we are here to understand and why we should be understanding that from the perspective of the South. Why do I need to understand internet infrastructure from the perspective of the indigenous communities where we are working with? And then it's more like, what is the point that you are making there? I never had this concern about US, but with that, I'm not saying you are wrong in thinking of that, because certain grants and certain fellowships may ask for this, and you may need to frame in a certain way. But I try to focus on the topic itself and say how it is important from the colonial perspective to hear other standpoints about what this means, instead of just staying with the standard history of the internet, that we need to pay attention on other kinds of histories that are happening right now. And that's how I think it helps. It have helped.
My experience with NIH is I have not done international work funded through NIH. And my understanding is that they will not fund an international project unless you can tie the research back to US related needs, right? So I do know of colleagues who have NIH grants, especially in the realm of HIV, that do work in multiple countries, including the US, because they're tying the global health issue to how it manifests in the United States. And depending on the organization that you're going to apply to, especially if they're doing more like policy level work, I think that in those scenarios, it's easier to be able to not buy in, but write in the justification in a way that it makes sense, and they're like, yes, we're going to fund this work. But that is part of the understanding what you're applying for before you do that, because there are more limitations, at least from the federal funding space, not foundations. We haven't talked about foundations. I haven't received foundation funding, but there are some foundations that have really great mechanisms as well that might cross beyond borders in order to get that research done.
Thank you both. These are all wonderful questions. And what I'm hearing is that it really depends on the foundation, the agency, the characteristic of those institutions that's funding your grant. So crafting your application that caters to the interests of those foundations and agencies and the types of grants are important. I also see one more question from the chat from doctoral students. Leah, do you want to raise that question yourself, or should I read your question for you, Leah? I think you're muted, Leah.
Yeah, I was just wondering, I'm in my third year of the program right now, and as I think about applying to academic jobs after I graduate, I'm wondering what the importance is of having these funding opportunities, or like funding, that you've acquired these funding opportunities listed specifically on your CV. And also, if there's a certain number that like R1 academic institutions are looking for or certain types of opportunities they're looking for, like just, planning ahead for that, or maybe it doesn't matter that much. So I would just be curious about that.
I would say, I mean, it depends on, I think, the kind of jobs and departments that you're looking at. So some will, and I think the kind of work that you're doing, like some researchers, I think, will be expected to show on the job market that they are like grant active. Whereas others, and I would put maybe most ethnographers in more this category. Like, I don't know that it's as emphasize, especially like going back to what we were talking about earlier, anytime you spend applying to a grant is time you're not writing something else. Like, I think having been on both sides of this process now, like publications definitely matter more for the kind of work that the kind of like, critical ethnographic work that a lot of us do. So if it's one or the other, like that, I think is where I would advise a student to put their energy is get publications and show that you can publish your work. And if you have outside funding, like that's awesome, but I don't know, I'm curious what others think, but in my experience, it's not the main thing that's looked at as a criteria for hiring like a first-year assistant professor.
Yeah, I would also mention that to show in the interview that you know which funds can you have in the future is maybe more important, because you finish your dissertation, so you got the resources you need to finish that and to get your PhD. So this is amazing and awesome. And now this is a question you may receive is, okay, which agencies or which sources of funds you think would be interested or you could apply for. So this is the kind of research you can do in preparation to your interview.
And I think that to add to what both Fernanda and Caitlin mentioned, Leah, I think it also depends on what your personal goals are. And where, like Caitlin said, like where you're applying. If I had stayed in the public health realm, I would probably not get hired as an assistant professor if I don't have evidence of my fundability. However, a lot of people also go to postdocs after the PhD. So that's also a space where you can apply for funding for individual projects to kind of demonstrate that while you're writing your dissertation work. I don't think that in many scenarios where, again, it depends on where you're going to be an ethnographer or a qualitative scholar and what those parameters are. But I like to think of it as like a highlight. It's like, and I can also do this and I have evidence of that, versus a complete must in some areas. In others, you are going to be competing against people who do have funding. So you need to, if you can, have it. But I wouldn't say that that's the case like across the board.
Yeah, I do think it really depends on the kinds of departments and kinds of jobs that you're applying for. I know that like in information science or School of Information, they really want you to start applying for grants in year one of tenure track professorship in many other schools and universities. So if you're applying for those jobs, then it might make sense to really have the knowledge and the list of kinds of resources that you will start to apply as you in the day one of your job. So maybe demonstrating that would be important. I see one more question from Miriam in the chat, and I think this is really important. We can discuss a little bit about data management, how you write your data management stuff in your application. So Miriam, are you willing to raise this question yourself, or should I read it from the chat?
Yeah, sorry, I'm at the library right now. So if you don't mind reading it from the chat. Thank you.
Yes, so Miriam was asking, if working with sensitive communities, how do you navigate reporting for grant requirements, but not contributing to surveillance of these communities? And I know that in a lot of the grants and fellowship, there is a page called Data Management Plan. So we can maybe talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think sometimes you need to add your own ethics for data on top of the ones that we have to follow with IRB and all that. And that is only you and the communities who can define that. If they want or not to be mentioned by name, if they want or not this to be reported, what is the kind of information that they feel proud to bring out to the world, and what kind they would prefer to keep in that space, in that community, and you are just grateful for you to know, but this is not something that you should bring to others. So sometimes this is necessary, and I just mentioned that this week we received a speaker here at Virginia Tech. I don't know if you know her. Her name is Ashley Wade. She's a professor at UVA, and what she was studying was Instagram and Black girls Instagram, basically. And IRB just told what she shared with us publicly, and you can find her talk on YouTube at Virginia Tech STS department, is that IRB asked her said her that this was, if the post was public, then you had the right to use it. But she didn't want to have that Black girls as characters in the book that she wrote. So what she did is to partner with a designer and asked them to draw some of that pictures in a way that she could show that images on the book without necessarily exposing the people and the girls in that situation. And I found that very beautiful. I also invite everyone to go for that publication. But this is just one example of that too.
Can you please put that publication in the chat, please, Fernanda? Because we would heavily benefit from looking at that work. Is there anyone from the panelists wants to add on to this question?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's Larissa put some interesting comments in the chat about IRB and the ways in which sometimes, you know, what the IRB requires like may not even really rise to the level of what we and maybe the folks that we're working with in the research like think is a necessary or appropriate level of like privacy or anonymity or things like that. And so I think, you know, it might be a bit similar with grant applications where, you know, they certainly like we had to have a plan in our NEH proposal, especially because we're dealing with stuff around, you know, union strategizing and things that people might not really, you know, want to become public or to be associated with their name. But it may like the sort of what is officially required from the grant or from the IRB may be sort of less than what seems appropriate given your topic. And
Yeah, and just piggybacking off of the conversation in terms of like requirements, in my experience, when I write reports, annual reports, progress reports, they're pretty high level. They're very like, this is what we did, and this is how many publications we have, and this is how we use the funding. They don't go into some of the deeper stuff. Now, like Fernanda was saying, when I've done research where I'm looking at people's timelines, so I'm inevitably looking at secondary individuals, right? That have not consented. I have taken the extra step to to give my participants specific information about how that is not going to be disseminated, shown, exposed, etc. And I also submit that to IRB. My experience with grants is that they might ask you questions about ethics, and you build that into your human subjects. Again, this is more from a medical perspective, where we have to have a human subjects section outlined and talk about the ethics. I'll include that there, but they kind of defer that to the IRB. Like, that's the IRB's responsibility in the experiences that I've had.
Thank you, all of you. And we're past 1, so I think we should end the conversation here. It's been such a fruitful conversation, and there's so many resources on the chat. Thank you, Melissa and Jeff, for keeping those resources. And this recording will be uploaded on YouTube. And yeah, like that's the end of, I think we're the rest of the DEWG event. It's going to be an internal one in December, and the public events will be convening back in next term. So thank you, everybody, for being here, and I hope you have a great rest of the week. Bye-bye.